Welcome to another episode of the Communities of Character podcast. I'm Jennifer Hogan, a former high school administrator, and now I serve as a character coach with a nonprofit called the Hope Institute. On today's episode, you'll get to hear from Phil Vincent, a longtime educator, consultant, and author, and he's also known as the voice of character education. Phil currently resides in the mountains of North Carolina, and on today's episode, you will hear the joy, wisdom, and humor as Phil shares stories and insights after a lifetime of learning and teaching about character. You're going to love this conversation with Phil, and I hope that you connect with us on social media and share this episode with others. Get ready for a great conversation with Phil Vincent. Hey, Phil, welcome to the podcast.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here, and I am so excited to have you on today's episode. And for our listeners to learn more about you and your work, I have recently learned about you and your work, and we had a great pre-podcast chat and made some connections between us. And so I am thrilled for our listeners to get to hear from you today.
Well, I'm mighty happy to be on your podcast, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. And so for our listeners who may not be familiar with you, would you please share a little bit about your current context?
Well, I guess I've been in education since the 1970s in one capacity or another. School teacher, central office administrator, site-based administrator. And in 1995, I wrote a book at the recommendation of one of my principals called Developing Character in Students. And the book kind of hit pretty well. And I started getting calls for people if I come to their school. So I took a year off from my school district, and it sort of became a career, the unexpected career. So I've traveled from Singapore to northern Canada, Alaska, and 40 states in the United States, working with schools and school districts and communities on character education.
Wow, that is amazing. Well, you've been called the voice of character education. I'm very curious, how did you get that name, and how did you get involved in character education?
Well, the only reason I can possibly understand that is everybody else must have lost their voice that day, and I was the only one who could speak. But I think probably some people gave me that because I did travel quite a bit, much more than people who were tied to the universities could get out. And I spoke, I don't know, thousands of times, I guess, about what I thought was quality character education, what we could do. And of course, the thing that helped me most was that I would travel and learn things from educators. I would learn things from principals, from superintendents, from community members. And I would then take that and package that into what I was talking to school districts about. So I felt that in some ways my work was constantly evolving. So people would have me back, what have you learned? And we would then go from there. And so I really think I became sort of a mouthpiece for a lot of what was going on.
That's awesome. And so was there some spark that caused you to get involved in character education, or was it a teacher, or was it just always a passion in you?
Well, I had a very job-centered major in college called philosophy. Which, boy, they line up to hire you with that degree. And I loved philosophy, and I loved history of thought and fields like that. And as I went through and started teaching school and got a master's degree, I was sort of exposed to the writings of Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development. And when I did my doctorate at North Carolina State, I was fortunate to work with someone who had been very instrumental in developing and enhancing Kohlberg's view of moral development, which was Norm Sprinthal, and also another colleague of his, John Arnold. And those two guys really influenced me. But when I was finishing my program, I went back to the public schools. I did not go to the university. Nothing against universities. I spent enough time in them. But those two gentlemen really influenced me. And I decided, well, what would this look like in practice? How do we build caring communities? How do we do this?
That's awesome. Well, I love that you talked about when you were the voice of character education and traveling and working with schools, that you would learn from the educators with whom you're speaking, and then you would share that with other schools. And that is so powerful, to be that connector and to share with others what's happening in schools. And just that practical application piece, I think, is so important. And I heard you say that character education is like investing. You said if you invest for a quarter, you're in trouble. And if you invest for the long run, you're going to be successful. Would you talk more about that analogy?
Well, my view on that was that it's not going to happen overnight. And if it's one thing that Marvin Berkowitz and the work that they've done out at in St. Louis and Tom Lacona's work is, it takes time to do this. In some ways, we have to realize that this is not a walk, it's a journey. And how do we begin looking at ourselves as role models? How do we begin building relationships with communities on how important this is? And then how do we begin changing what we do with students, not to control them, but to develop them? And that takes time. Development is slow. Controlling can be quick. But development and internalizing that and making it intrinsic rather than extrinsic takes time. And in some ways, you're changing school cultures. I was in one school where I saw a teacher running down the hall to give some kids their rewards for doing something right in class that day. And when I started paying attention to that, I found out more and more people were doing stuff like this to try to control kids. So developing kids is about changing your culture. And it takes time to do that. But we do know now, with all the research that's going on, what works. We understand what seems to work well, and also to realize we're never going to hit perfection in this. And if I can throw out one other idea, I have often thought that and I've seen so many organizations package character education as a program. Well, this year's program is next year's shelf fodder. If you talk to administrators, teachers, and others, when somebody comes up with the latest and best program, you might as well be getting ready for the next one, because you're not building within the ethos or life of the building. It becomes something we add on. And there is no time to add anything on to schools now, what schools have to do. So it has to be included in who we are as educators, and also how we bring our community and our students along with us.
Absolutely. Well said. It does take time. It is definitely a process. There is no magic wand.
No.
Yeah, something that we like to say at the Hope Institute is that it can't be an add-on. Character education can't be an add-on because educators already have so much on their plates. And so what we like to say is that character education is the plate. Based on your years of experience and working with schools, what suggestions do you have for educators to help make developing character the plate?
Well, I really like that analogy, and I used to use that too, and say basically the same thing. That character education is not another thing on your plate; it is the plate.
Mm-hmm.
It's what everything falls down on. Who am I as a person? What do I want to be as an educator? How do I want to strive to that? Knowing full well I'm going to have some days that are better than others. I used to ask teachers, have you ever said something to a child who you wish you could take back? And I had one teacher said, I've never done that. And I immediately thought, well, you need to ease up on your medication, because that's delusional. Of course, if we teach, we sometimes have better moments than others. Mm-hmm. So we have to think of this as a journey. But the journey is, we want to help the social and moral development of children to be as important as their intellectual development, and that both of them can go hand in hand. Marvin and I have talked a lot about the importance of, when you're examining literature and history, that you have discussions about it, that you let kids share ideas. You teach them how to learn to disagree without being disagreeable, to focus on ideas and information and not simply opinions on things. So that's one of the things that most good teachers do. And it's just, and you can say, okay, I do that. All right, now that's one thing I'm doing. I like to ask people, how are your relationships with your students in your classroom? Do you have positive relationships or not so, or your relationships not very supportive with kids? What are you role modeling to kids so that they see you as the compass? And I've sometimes written about the importance of the teacher as the compass. And that literally the classroom is set by us as the teacher on who we are and who we want to be. And the same thing applies to the principal. I would argue to the superintendent in districts also. What do we want to be as people? I'll just throw one thing out that this was years ago, and I can't even remember what state I was in. But I was talking, and I said that educators, if we look at ourselves as being the compass, that's an important way to start the day. I'm the compass. I will determine a lot of what's going to go on in my class that day. And this principal later sent me a picture. During the summer, he got this beautiful compasses, inlaid woods, and every teacher got one of those at the beginning of school. And he asked them to please put it on your desk and look at that every morning when you come in and say, what kind of compass will I be today? How will I be the compass? So that's a simple thing to do, but he said it was profound. They had a lot of discussion on that. So to me, it's just a matter of being the people we want to be and also helping children become the people that they need to be.
You make such great points. And, we have to model what we want to see in others. And so I appreciate you sharing that and sharing that story. That is really powerful to have that concrete reminder on your desk as a teacher, and to also have those conversations between the adults in the building. Something that we believe in at Hope Institute is that cultures of character happen in those caring communities between the adults, between the students, and then also between the students and adults. So could you share some strategies that help to build relationships between those stakeholders in a school?
Well, one of the things, and I like what you just said, it's important to recognize that the relationships that we have between each other as adults matters greatly, even with the kids. And the reason I know this is I'm a passionate middle school guy. I love effective middle school teams. A lot of my focus and my work was in middle schools. And if that team is not functioning well, if they have friction between them, oftentimes as a central office administrator, and I wouldn't say oftentimes, sometimes I would have to go down and meet with teams and help them process and work through what was dividing them because it was affecting the students. Mm-hmm. But because teachers would say, well, so I know so-and-so lets you get by with this, but not here. Well, come on. Mm-hmm. But how can we better do this? What discussion can we have? So I've often been a big believer that the adults in the building need to have time to talk with each other and speak. We need to have a common book reads that we then address. Hal Urban's great book, 20 Things I Want My Kids to Know, is a good one. But his book on what great teachers do is another great book. Lessons from the Classroom, I think is the title of that one. And it's a great book where people can read and go, oh, what are we doing here in our school to impact on that? So I'm a real big believer in book studies that we meet once a month for cake and ice cream. And we sit down and we have what I call discussions. What have we learned? How are we reflecting on that? Mm-hmm. Regarding working with students, I was a big believer and that the first week of school should be spent on developing relationships with our students, not jumping into the curriculum. I used to beg my teachers, please take time. The curriculum will be there all year, but what are the relationships we build? What are some of the rules that we can agree to in the classroom? And also, more important than the rules, what are the routines we want to do? How we come in a classroom, how we greet each other, how we handle ourselves in discussions, and to role play that and to practice that, I find to be incredibly important for schools to do. Mm-hmm. Too often schools jump right in and we make assumptions that boys and girls know what to do. And after the pandemic, I've talked to teachers saying we feel like we're having to reteach an enormous amount of stuff they ought to know and go stop. there's a lot of things we ought to know we don't know, and there's also things that we forget. So my suggestion was, when schools opened up, was to spend time on building in classrooms rules, and then these are the rules we'll live by. What does that look like in practice? Not so much don't do this, but what to do. What are our routines, our procedures in our class? How do we handle concerns? I went to this one elementary school one time. They started this in kindergarten and went all the way through fifth grade. When the boys and girls came from eating breakfast in the morning, they got to the classroom. When they walked in the classroom, there would be certain places where they would have to put their coats and all the other stuff. And they would sit down every day with a morning meeting. And the first part of the morning meeting was, who has good news to share? Which I thought was incredible.
Yes.
Well, before that, it would just be pass the greetings around the circle. And who has some good news to share? And then what they would do, are there any concerns that we have? And boys and girls, and I saw this, I was there for 2 days, would raise their hands and go, well, I want to talk about this. And they wouldn't allow them to talk about, I'm having a problem with Phil. Phil's been mean to me. We will deal with that separate. But are there some issues in the classroom, in the school, in the hall, other things that we may need to address? And kids would talk about that. And finally, they would, if they couldn't reach a solution to that, they would table it till the next day. The teacher would then go over the basic schedule of that day with the students, and the teacher assistant, if they had one there, was right there with them. And then they would all join hands and say, let's have a good day. And let's remember who we are and who we want to be. And they would go to their classes and work. It was a phenomenal school. And yet it was a school that had some economic issues. And I told the principal there when I was leaving, I said, you are literally the proof that lack of economics does not have to impact on lack of social and moral excellence. And that's what it was. And that school was just magnificent in what they were doing. That their focus every day was to build those relationships and to get that solidified as a community before they began the curriculum. And by the way, their academic scores were excellent. And why wouldn't they be?
Absolutely. We just did site visits recently through Hope Institute, and we visited a school that is a National School of Character. And one of their points of emphasis were their morning meetings. So it's so great to hear you talk about that. They said it was a game changer for them. And many of them start like what you're just talking about, starting the day with good news. Right now there's so much negativity in the world, and in education, there's so much testing and accountability that's in place. And sometimes schools try to improve their test scores and other academic measures. And I'm very interested to hear, in your research and in your life's work, what have you seen in schools where they focus on academic improvement without working on character, compared to those schools that made character education their primary focus, and then the effect it had on academic improvement?
Climate is everything in a school and a classroom. It's more important than the curriculum. The curriculum changes. You build the right culture, the culture doesn't change. The culture only improves, or it can be enhanced. Schools that focus on that, not to push aside academics. I'm an academic in many ways, although I never really taught full time at a university or anything. I love the academy. I love studying. I love reading. I love all of that. But that's not all who I am. I believe that schools that focus and say, okay, let me use something from Tom Lacona. He talks about smart and good high schools. I want smart and good schools. I wanted my daughter to achieve as much as she could academically, and she went to a wonderful schools. As she told me, when she got to the university, it was easier than her high school, and I think it probably was. So she had that, but more importantly, she had teachers who really believed that her social development and who she developed as a person was as important. And so the combination of those two is what creates excellence, in my view, in schools. It's not either or. One of the things that I talk about now, and I'm 68 years old, And as someone said, you probably look older, and I may do. If when I go into a school now, people look at me and go, "Hey, he looks like my pawpaw." So I get that. But one of the things that I've learned is that if we take the time to enhance people's excellence, social and moral excellence, and that we start looking at that in schools, having discussions with kids. Let me give you one interesting thing that I learned from a teacher. Every teacher has had students who are failing academically, often because not they can't do the work, but they've got an attitude. Maybe there's some difficulties or something, or they're just doing what kids do. And believe me, I was a kid once. I understand a lot more than they thought I understood. What this teacher told me to do was when a child is struggling in your class, before your next test, get right beside that child at the desk a lot and go, okay, let's work on this. Let's do this. Let's get this. Ask that kid questions. Make sure that child is developing competency. And when the child takes the next test, the child has gone from F's to a B. And she said, now take the F papers. Never throw away bad papers. Keep those. Take the F paper and the B paper and write a note to that child. And I did this at high school kids. And it would say something like, Robert, this is where you were, turn paper over. And Robert would turn it over and see that F. He earned it. He should see it. And I would have another note, turn paper back over. And I'd make sure they did it. This is where you are now. You are capable of excellence. I'm honored to be your teacher. Thank you. P.S. Would you get this signed? I've had 19-year-old kids in high school bring that paper back to me signed. And one kid one time said, Mr. Vincent, can I have it back? I said, absolutely. And I said, what are you going to do with it? He said, I'm going to put it on the refrigerator. So we think that we can't tie it all together, but it's not either or, it's and. My actions as a leader in the classroom can help students begin to develop a sense of competency, a sense of character, a sense of excellence. And I can do that school-wide too. There's so much we can do as school leaders to enhance that also. But I think that's very important that we quit thinking either or. That's a fallacy of thought. That's what we do in politics and stuff now. We think either or, and we see what that's getting us. And I'm not getting political here. I'm just saying it's not either or, it's and. So we take great ideas and we put it all together. I want excellence in academic performance, but I also want excellence in social and moral performance. I want my high school and middle school teams that when the game is over to be the team that goes and shakes hands first. I want to play hard. I played hard, but I also want to play fairly. I want my arts program to be excellent. I want our music program that when we walk up on the stage, we are so crisp and sharp and we give the performance. And then afterwards, the choir is volunteering to do something in the community, and we're going to sing perhaps over the season and do stuff like that. That builds competence in kids, and it also builds excellence, and it becomes what the people think about the school. Not all the school has all these AP and IB excellence, but also that choir is out in the community. That football team talks about character and talks about what they're learning. And I think all that's important. So it's not separate. It's all together.
I love that. They're not mutually exclusive from each other. I appreciate you sharing that. So good. And I just have a question for you. If you were to start over with your research, is there anything that you would have done differently, maybe researched more, or maybe focused on more?
I think looking back, I have been the luckiest guy on earth in so many ways. And I say that. I grew up where we always had enough to eat and we always had a house to live in. I was fortunate enough to go to Appalachian State University in 1972, which it seemed to be the place where kids that had enough went to first generation. I had great teachers who took time to take a very average kid and push him to become a little better. If I had it to do all over again, I thought about this question. I've thought about it before because people have asked me. I may have wanted to have gone to a university a little, perhaps in my late 50s or mid 50s, because I've learned so much from traveling all over the United States and even in Singapore and other places, and working with people in Japan, that I would have liked to have perhaps shared that. Uh, Also, I've thought that I would have liked to have gone out and become a superintendent at some point, because my approach would have been, I would have probably had my associates and assistants, each one of the curriculum people, you handle that. I'm going to, and I learned this from a great superintendent, I'm going to go into schools every day and I'm going to see what we're doing to develop the people that we want our people to be, our young people to be. Because remember, they're the ones that are going to pay our Social Security. So I think I would have liked perhaps to have done those two things. But when I look back, I have been so blessed in so many ways and so fortunate that I got to take what I was going to do for 1 year and make it literally the focus of my professional work life. So I've thought about that. One of the other things, though, and I just need to add this, I always thought the best thing I did was teach. I love teaching kids. I love the day. I love being a coach. So I have a good friend who was an excellent principal, was poised to move up. And he looked around one day and said, I've always been a teacher and a coach. He resigned from the principalship, he went back to being a masterful teacher, just unbelievable teacher, and then started working with the football program. And he's taken a football program, basically, he said, using the same students, and they never had much success, but because of character, they are now a successful football program. And he says the football skills are important, but the character is every bit as important. So I think in some ways I wouldn't mind, probably should have taken every few years, go back to the classroom, because the work that teachers do is far more demanding than anything that I ever did. And I taught enough years, I forgot about 10 years, that I know how hard it is to be a teacher, but I also know the rewards I had as a teacher, and it was worth it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is awesome, Phil. So what's one big takeaway you want listeners to get from our conversation today?
Character education is not an add-on program. It is the plate on which everything is literally laid. That my job as a teacher is to go back and to make sure that I am the moral compass and that I am the person that my dog thinks I am. And if you have dogs, when you walk in the house, they're so glad to see you. I think that it'd be nice if when I walked in the classroom, the kids were that glad to see me, or if I was a principal, the same way. So I believe that's important. And also to please be aware that if you buy a program, you need to make sure that it fits within the ethos or life or what you want to build within the school. And I personally think that you can figure a lot of this out and then get supplementary materials to support your efforts. But first of all, you got to figure out what you want to do.
Such good takeaways. Phil, how can our listeners find out more or connect with you?
Well, it's one of the things that's happened as I've gotten older. I was the president and developer of the Character Development Group, and we've more or less let other people take that on now. My email, I'll be glad to respond to people with. And do you want to post that, or you want me to give that here?
I can put it in the show notes. I'm going to link all of the books that you mentioned and all the other folks that you mentioned. I'm going to put all that in the show notes, so I can put that there for you. I just want to tell you, it has been such a pleasure to spend time with you today. I am a new fan, but I'm one for life. And I just appreciate so much the work that you've done over your professional lifetime and how it has positively impacted students and educators. And I just thank you immensely for sharing your time and expertise with us. We appreciate you. Thanks for listening to the Communities of Character podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others and post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. Thanks again and take care.